what's up YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel and the From Computer to Cardboard series. In this series so far, we have designed the Against the Storm board game. We had a look at all the things that made Against the Storm a unique game in its genre. It's kind of like a city builder, but it has roguelike elements and a whole bunch of other stuff like that. We also looked at how to interpret those unique parts of the video game as board game mechanics. We built a prototype, we printed it all out, we guillotined it all, we sleeved it all up, and we got it to our regular playtest session, so a monthly playtest, and we got to play it. Now, this episode is all about what now. So we got to playtest it. I got an idea of what it actually looks like. What would I change? What went well? This is basically a reflection on how the project went so far. And then at the end of the video, we're going to announce what the next game in this series is going to be. And I'm going to talk about what some of that is going to be like. So stick around for that. But let's talk about how the playtest went. So there was a few small problems. Let's start with the prototyping problems. So I missed a few cards. There was 245 cards, and some were missing. I only printed out enough for 2 players to be able to play the game. I could have had a 3rd player play, because we did have enough people there at the play testing. But I think just playing it with 2 was probably really all I needed to see what I wanted to see. Later on, if I was looking for more balancing stuff, I would maybe play with 3. But for the purposes of this video series, and because it's not a game that I know I'm going to be publishing and needs to be perfect to get to the finish, I just needed to play it enough to see how it functions and be able to record this video and talk about what worked and what didn't. So some cards were missing. We were missing copper bars, bricks, and planks, which, if you've played Against the Storm, are the main things that you're making a lot of. And that's just the reminder card part for us to track what it was. So I just used something as a proxy to remember what was there. It didn't actually come up as being a problem. Speaking of 245 cards, that is a lot. Some things didn't need to be cards. A lot of things I want to be tiles and boards. So we had building cards. Let's start with the building cards. So you buy a building card, it gets put into your personal deck. However, if you buy a shelter, it doesn't get put into your personal deck. It's just kind of put vaguely to the side somewhere, which felt a little awkward and clunky. I feel like it would have been better if it got put into a discard pile and then you just got a tile or something. But it does add bloat. It doesn't remove components, it just adds them. The other main thing is that we have the large pile of cards, which is how you track what resources you have. And when there's 10, it's not a big deal, because you're like, yeah, this is all my things, I can see it really well. And we were using gigantic cubes, which is not what we ship with the game. I use much smaller cubes. We're using really big ones, because that's what I happened to find. And it would cover all the symbols, and it would be really hard to kind of see what stuff was all the time. And turning the resource stash, which gets up to 35 cards or whatever it was, and we had 10 for the most of it, takes up too much space. So finding a board way to do this, ideally it would be a large player board that just has rows. It has the icon, let's say meat, has the meat icon, and it has just punched in segments that a cube can sit in. It won't move around. And you just kind of go, yeah, I have 1, now I have 2, now I have 3, and so on, which I think would have been better. It's a bit harder for me to produce personally. Making cards is very easy, and so I just chose to make cards because the goal is to just get the game played and see how it works from there. So making it look amazing for the very first prototype is often a waste of time and resources, because a lot of that stuff might get scrapped immediately or removed, or this didn't work, why did I spend an hour making it? So just getting into the minimum viable testing prototype is the goal, and to be able to see all these things and go, okay, this actually really did need to be this thing, or this was too big, or this was too clunky, it needs to change to this. Because everything is cards, everything is just basically a piece of paper with whatever the symbol is on it. But cards really only should have been used in decks that require randomization. Anything else could have been tiles or could have been boards. So there's a bunch of stuff that could have been boards. The reputation tracker, the impatience tracker, the season tracker, all could have been boards or tiles. And then like some of the resource nodes should have all just been tiles. So there should have just been 34 resource node tiles instead of cards. All the resource node cards are the same as the your resource stash tracking cards. They're identical. So setting up the game is really confusing because they're all the same. You have to make 3 piles and make sure that you have exactly the 3 of all the things. Because some things don't have multiple ones. For example, drizzle water doesn't require a node. You just get rain. It's raining. That's what the whole season is. It's this type of rain. So it doesn't need a node that populates a quantity. So it was kind of a waste. And that could have been much neater and more organized in that way. Next, let's talk about the playtesting feedback. So in the last video, we sat down, we talked with Ryan after playing the game, and we ran through a whole bunch of things that worked and that didn't. The main issue was that the Queen's orders were not like too good, but we were both positively incentivized to do it and negatively incentivized if we weren't doing it, right? So it's kind of awkward. If you did complete them and quickly, you got a building as a reward. If you didn't complete them, impatience would build up and punish you over time. So we always felt like we could only be doing Queen's orders. Now, we weren't able to build up resource generating buildings. Ryan, playing the Beaver player, started off with the workshop and was able to had the ability to make those tier 1 resources of planks and bricks, but I didn't. And that needed to be a thing that was like way more available because those resources is how you purchase buildings. And so I'm thinking some of the things that should change with that is buildings should cost less, and or making planks and bricks should be way easier. Or you always start off with the makeshift workshop, which is the like shittier version, and then upgrading to the workshop later or whatever is better, or something like that. Because not being able to make planks and bricks really hurts. So I think that needs to be a card that's included in the starter deck. Also, we struggled to ever purchase buildings. I don't think we didn't ever purchase a building because they all cost much more than what we could make. And so I think that's a balancing thing of the, do we make buildings cheaper and also make it easier to make planks and bricks? Which was kind of awkward in itself. So we ended up only getting buildings from completing the Queen's orders, which is one of the rewards. Now, we messed up in playing it. One of the rules as written was that as you get more workers, you're supposed to draw more cards to have more options to choose from when it comes to what resource. Because the loop is basically you draw a hand that's cards equals the number of workers you have. And that shows you what actions, potentially, that you could choose from for that worker to be doing. And we did only 3 cards the entire time, which is the number of guys you start off with, despite us getting a lot of extra workers pretty quickly. We both had 6 by the end of the first year. And there's only like 9 or 10 total that you could have. So it was a little awkward in that it didn't quite work, and we're always kind of limited to these options. But one of the suggestions that I made in that post-game interview that I think actually would work perfectly with how the game is supposed to scale is that when you draw a hand, let's say you've got 5 workers, you draw a hand of 5 cards, you can play any number of buildings with the same name, and then you're getting duplicates of that resource. So instead of going, here's my stonecutter's camp, I will get 1 stone. My worker goes on the stone. That's it. Instead you go, I have 2 stonecutter's camps. I'm going to play both of them. Here's my worker. I get 2 stone. Now, each node populates only up to a maximum of 5 per season, and it resets. So if I go, here's 5 stone, I've taken all of the stone, like we're not like it's capped. It doesn't go insane. It can't go infinite, right? So I don't think it's broken. And it gives more value to buying additional copies of the starting resource card. So if I buy more stonecutters camps, then it has value to me because I can turn the one stonecutter camp that I draw into perhaps the second one. I'm doubling up on something that exists already. There was also a moment where we bought a stamping mill, and Ryan got one first, and then I was like, "Well, you have one already. I'll get the next one so that I can potentially access those resources that it creates because it makes boots, and lizards like boots, and I wanted my lizards to have boots, and so." Instead, it would have been better for him to take it because then he could double up. He could make 2 boots or 2 copper bars at the stamping mill instead of just one. And so I think those kind of choices would like be a lot better. And like the actual deck building element of it is more strategic because the things that you're picking up off the Queen's Order or the things that you're buying and building have priority levels to them beyond just what do I need to have access to based on what's in the tech tree. And so I thought that would be like a big upgrade. It would solve some of the problems in the resource acquisition because we never got resources faster ever. And so it was just easiest to get the most basic thing, spend it on the Queen's Orders. And then we hit the tier 1 Queen's Orders and you go, well, I can't make that. I don't have the infrastructure. I don't have anything that can make this thing, and so we saw that the end of the game was going to come to us quite quickly, and so that was a little awkward, and so we called it at the end of the first year, and we're like, look, what's left for us to potentially be able to do here? Not much, because we weren't able to buy the things that we needed to do this. So there's kind of like this big wedge point after the first 2 seasons, maybe, where it does become awkward. The way that the seasons were designed was that the very first drizzle season is very good at the beginning of the game. Clearance season, which is the second one, is very good at the middle of the game. And then the storm season is just bad for you all of the time. But after the 3rd year, which is kind of marking where you should be getting close to winning, is when it starts to get hard and plagues come out and it gets worse. So I think that's fine, but we want to try and conform the game speed to that. So that maybe in the 4th year, or that's kind of when you're winning, which I think is fine. And some of that can be adjusted to work a bit better. And a lot of the stuff that I want to change, I think, is actually minor balancing things. I think adjusting the cards being played from hand and fixing some of the costs of the buildings and making it easier to access planks and bricks earlier on, because you could always access leather from the beginning, which is the 3rd ingredient needed to buy stuff from the shop. So making sure that everyone has a makeshift workshop so that everyone could make planks and bricks, I think is the first step. Second step is you play multiples of a card from your hand to get additional resources, which would help a lot because as your deck gets bigger and you get more of the same thing, it gets better. And then as you get more guys, you do actually get like a bigger hand size, potentially up to 10. But then you have to be able to feed them all. What else? I think one of the other problems was that it felt like we hit the 2nd tier of the Queen's Orders. Because the first tier is basic resources. The 2nd tier is stuff that requires 1 step of combining. So most complex foods are in here, like planks and bricks and that kind of stuff, copper bars. And then the last tier is packs of luxury goods, which is like an extra step on that. It felt like we hit tier 2 too soon because we hadn't built any stuff up yet. I don't think that the tiers of the Queen's Orders need to specifically be changed. I think that they just need to be monitored so that it matches the speed of the game. So you should be able to have enough stuff built where you are already kind of making that 2nd tier of goods when you hit those Queen's Orders coming out. And we played until the end of the 1st year and we had already hit the tier 2 stuff. And so I think that maybe that is a little bit too soon. Maybe the tier 1 needs to be a little bit bigger. And adding more cards, right? But so we can kind of get to that point. Because I think maybe if at the 3 years part is kind of where it starts to get more difficult, You don't want to be already in the third tier. I think that's too much. I think you should be maybe in the middle of the second tier, which means that you need 2 years of the first tier of resources, which is just basic stuff, which is maybe a little bit too long. It's maybe a year and a half. I think 1 year and then drizzle season, the halfway through clearance season is like when you find the second tier, and then ideally the second tier runs all the way up until the end of year 3, and then year 3 when you start hitting the plagues, then you also start having to do packs of luxury goods and stuff like that, which I think will compound the difficulty again. And so I think that is you have to build out that slope really neatly so that it matches the progression through the game. And this is stuff that's not problems that exists in the original design, right? This is problems that are solved through playtesting. A lot of the original concepts and ideas and stuff work, and then playtesting goes, okay, this doesn't work with this thing, or this doesn't match the pacing that you're trying to do, or this is too complicated generally, or this took up too much space, or this is too much to remember. Then you just need to go and streamline it out, which I think is fine. I think a lot of stuff could be streamlined. I think populating a node is something that could just go, and where basically you go, well, I need to make tea right now, but I don't actually have any of the other previous stuff on their nodes, but I could make those things so that I'm making tea, I'm making everything up to tea. I have all the components to pay for the previous things, and it will move up the chain and make tea, which I think is fine. It just streamlines a lot of it, and you still have to be kind of aware of what the tech tree is and stuff like that. But I think that's fine. I think there needs to be reminder cards for a lot of things because the game is quite complicated. And if you haven't played the video game and you understand what the tech tree is and how the different things combine to make stuff, it's very confusing. Ryan did have a little bit of that problem at the start, and so I was doing a little bit of a hand-holding. He also struggled with the water system a little bit because way water works is that when you spend it in a crafting recipe, it can be any type of water, but there's an additional ability where you can spend water that matches the season you're in to get an extra resource. So water at the right time is a wild. And so he had a bunch of clearance water, and then we moved into the storm season, and he's like, why can't I do that thing now? I want to be able to spend this water and get this extra resource, but I can't when we're in the right season. And for me, I'm like, this is fine mechanically because you want to reach a second year, a third year, which we didn't play to. But in your second year, you're like, oh, sick, all this clearance water that I've saved has value now, and I can spend it, and it's like investing in the future, kind of. I think all that's fine. So, reflecting on it, how happy am I with how it turned out? The game was much bigger than I wanted. Even though early on I talked about managing scope and I talked about trying not to bloat out the game too much, it did turn out to be very large. However, it wasn't insanely complicated. On your turn, you really only have one action. You draw the cards in your hand and you go, well, I want this resource. And how you're choosing which resource you want is based on what the Queen's orders said that they want, or do you need something to build a building with, or is there something that's going to make your guy happy? And so you just have this list of a priority, and then you look at your hand and you go, well, I can make this one, which will make this thing happy. And you're like, okay. And so I think all of that worked. As a player, making choices in what you're doing was fine. I don't think any of that was complicated. And so I'm happy that that succeeded. I think some of the stuff in the testing just needs to streamline that curve from the early game all the way until the end of the game. And because where we stumbled kind of early on, we need to smooth that out, fix some of the resource allocations, fix the ability to get resources faster as you approach the end of the game, and because your factories, your stuff gets more efficient, if people get better at it, it makes sense thematically to be able to make more wood or whatever, or being able to assign more people to the same thing or something like that, so that you can potentially build this engine over time. I think that wasn't happening, and then maybe it would actually be a really good game because I like the core of it. I like how it works. I think it communicates what makes Against the Storm unique so far. There is that inherent challenge of it where the impatience is building up over time no matter what you're doing. And then that, Okay, if I make my guys happy, then I'm going to get close to the win condition. If I make the queen happy, I'm going to get further away from the lose condition, but also close to the win condition. I'm building a whole bunch of buildings. I have my own personal deck I have a guy that I'm working with. So I think a lot of the actual individual pieces are cool. Like, I did actually enjoy playing the game. Considering some playtests, you pull everything out, you play, you go, this ain't it, fam. No. And so it can be kind of tough. Now, let's talk about the next episode. So the intention of this series, From Computer to Cardboard, is that it will just continue to run. I'm hoping that I can just do an episode every single week where we pick a video game and we go through the same sort of steps. We talk about what makes that video game unique. I look at what mechanics I can express as a board game. I build a prototype. We take it to the playtesting night, and then we do a reflection episode. How well did it work? How well did it communicate the things that were important about the original game? And once a game is complete, like the Against the Storm board game, I'm then going to pick the next game, and then I'm going to move on and repeat the steps and try and keep this running for as long as I can. Because I really like it as a concept. I think for people that have an interest in making board games will see these videos and be like, oh, hell yeah, I like this video game. I have an interest in board games. Maybe I want to make board games. This is an interesting way of interpreting use of inspiration in creating a game. And so you put it all together. And it's fun for me too, right? Like, this is all kind of professional development. The Against the Storm is actually the biggest board game prototype I've made to date. In probably not so much complexity, but in number of components. Number of cards at least. And so being able to play with that and understanding how many things need to go together, I think was worthwhile for me to go into it, right? And part of it's fun. And if people are enjoying this series, I'm going to try and keep it going for as long as possible. But here's what game we are doing next. We're going to be doing Outer Wilds. Now, Outer Wilds is a fantastic video game, possibly one of the greatest ever. Now, what makes Outer Wilds really unique is that you can only play it once. And if you watch somebody else play it, you will not be able to play the game, because the way that the game functions is it teaches you about the world and the puzzles and all the different parts of it. And once you've learned that, you can't learn it again. And so the Outer Wilds experience is playing the game, loving it, and then going and watching your favorite Twitch streamer struggle to play through the game, because that's the only content you have left. And so I think Outer Wilds is really interesting because I think it can be communicated as a board game quite simply. Because, are you ready for my most insane hot take? Outer Wilds is an escape room where you can only play it once, because once you've solved all the puzzles and stuff, you know what they are. And you were just trying to get to a completed state, essentially. And the way to get to a completed state is to learn about how it is built. And that's kind of the goal. We're going to be trying to be building a game that meets that goal, but can only be played once. You've learned it, you've mastered it. You could not potentially play it a second time without already knowing everything, which is very different from what most board game experiences are, where you are trying to make sure that it has repeatability. You're trying to make sure that people can play this multiple times and it'll be fresh and interesting each time. Instead, it needs to be really impactful once. Which is going to be a tough challenge. And I've already lined up some celebrity guests to come and help me out with some ideas for this. I know some people that are specialists in the escape room genre that I've lined up to come on and help me out with this one. So, look, if you're interested in Outer Wilds, if you're interested in escape rooms, if you're interested in turning video games into board games, you should stick around, because this series is only going to get better as it goes along. Now, that is going to be it for this episode. And what happens next, the Outer Wilds game, might already be completed, and you can go and check it out. I'm going to have a playlist up on the screen where it's going to have all of the From Computer to Cardboard videos in it. If you missed some of the stuff at the beginning, you want to go back and watch the Against the Storm stuff, it'll be there. If the Outer Wilds stuff is already up, you can go and check that out right now. I will just have another random video up on the screen because we make a lot of cool different stuff on the channel that might be worth checking out. And as always, the subscribe button, which is the main magical way for you to incentivize the algorithm gods to deliver upon to you content from Cutlass Board Games. So stick around, because look, I'm really excited about what's going to happen next.